Welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. This week we bring to you another excellent show. However, this week we'll be deviating from our series on the counties of Ireland and instead bringing you a show about the Catholic Parish Registers in Ireland. In this show, we will be discussing what the registers are, the historical impact and influence, differences between them and civil registers, and how to access them. Today we have two very special guests, so I would like to welcome Cian and Lucas to the Genealogy Radio Show. Now let us get on with the show. Cian, can you tell me what the Catholic Parish Registers are and the process of microfilming these records?
The Catholic Parish Registers consist of records of baptisms, marriages, and burials in Ireland during the 19th century. The registers are one of the most important sources offered in Ireland for any individual looking to research further into their ancestral roots, and for family history researchers. Parish registers provide the earliest written source of family information. Unlike many other records, parish registers provide evidence of direct links between one generation and the next via baptismal registers, and one family and another via marriage registers. The Catholic parish registers were the beginning of records being kept as a result for the majority of Irish people. In the 19th century, the only written records that prove their existence. The recording of registers in the Roman Catholic Church was first ordered by the Council of Trent during a meeting of the bishops between the periods of 1545 and 1563. In 1949, Dr. Edward MacLysaght, who was the keeper of manuscripts at the National Library of Ireland and the Chief Herald of Ireland, approached the Bishop of Limerick. He offered the bishop the services of the National Library of Ireland in order to preserve the records found in the Catholic Church's records of parish registers. Every member of the hierarchy took up Dr. MacLysaght and the NLI's offer to microfilm the parish registers in order to make them more easily accessible. The cut-off date for the microfilm was set at 1880, as although registration for the baptisms and other records in parishes began in 1864, there were gaps and inconsistencies where records were not accurately kept for years. The NLI began filming the parish registers a year later in 1950 and were still being microfilmed after 1954, when Edward MacLysaght, the man who originally took on the project, was no longer keeper of manuscripts at the National Library of Ireland. The procedure for microfilming the records was as follows. A senior member of the NLI was sent to the parish to gather the records and bring them to the NLI located in Kildare Street. The records were to be filmed there and then returned to the diocese. The microfilming of the parish registers was a long process, and it took over 20 years for the 3,500 parish registers to be microfilmed from 1,086 different parishes in both the Republic of Ireland and in what is now known as Northern Ireland. Later in the 1990s, additional filming took place for a number of registers in Dublin. The start date for these parish registers varies, with some registers beginning in the 1780s and 1790s, while other registers that are better kept beginning even further back in the 1740s. The majority of the records found are belonging to births and marriages. However, the death records from the Catholic parish registers can be seen most commonly in the parishes located in the northern regions of Ireland. The earliest records of baptisms from these registers were found in the counties Waterford, Cork, Wexford, Tipperary, and Galway. However, there is few Catholic parish burials that have survived prior to the 20th century. To this present date, there are 390,000 images microfilmed online. It is worth noting that while the Church of Ireland was the established state church from 1536 to 1870, an overwhelming amount of the Irish population remained Roman Catholic throughout this period. It is also important to note that when searching the Catholic parish registers, that Latin was the chosen language of the Catholic Church until the 1960s. As a result of this being the main language, the earlier baptism, marriage, and burial records from the registers often include Latin. Place names and surnames were not translated, but first names were. It is typically seen that the Latin language was more commonly seen in the rural areas of Ireland, while the more urban districts adopted English in their parish register records. Although Irish was an important language in Ireland, none of the parish records are in Irish, and names that were Irish, such as Sean, were translated as the English variation, such as John.
And Keane, could you tell me about the Catholic emancipation and how it affected the Catholic Parish Registers?
After the Reformation, King Henry VIII split from the Catholic Church. In 1536, the Irish Parliament declared King Henry VIII head of the Church of Ireland. Consequently, the Church of Ireland became the state church and retained the existing parish structures. The Roman Catholic Church therefore had to create larger parishes due to the constrictions imposed on it as a result of the Reformation and because of population change. The Council of Trent was the most important movement of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church's first significant reply to the growing Protestant Reformation. The primary purpose of the council was to condemn and refute the beliefs of the Protestants, such as Martin Luther and John Calvin, and also to make the set of beliefs in Catholicism even clearer. Approximately 40 clergymen, mainly Catholic bishops, were in attendance during the 25 times over the next 18 years that the council convened. Catholicism stayed overwhelmingly strong in Ireland. Very few converted to Protestantism. Given the fragmentation of political authority in Ireland in the 16th century and the consequent disorders that racked many areas, the Irish church authorities were not always able to call on the secular authorities to enforce canon law as rigorously as their counterparts in more settled regions of Europe. In a context of wide-scale economic underdevelopment, impoverished congregations could not always afford to maintain church buildings in perfect condition or to subsidize the education of many parish clergy to university standards. Yet there is evidence of many new churches being built or renovated in the century before the Reformation. Lay people's wills, their foundation of chantries, their election of church wardens, and the growth of religious confraternities, not to mention the remarkable burgeoning of the mendicant orders, especially the Franciscans, reflect widespread commitment to Catholic doctrines and practices, and a keen attachment to the institutional church on the eve of the Reformation. That was bound to influence Irish responses to the Reformation. Thus, if we skip on to the 19th century, the number of Catholics was still on the rise. According to the 1861 census, almost 78% of the population was Catholic. By 1891, this had risen to 89%. Thus, Catholicism barely wavered on the island of Ireland, despite the British Parliament and monarchy's best efforts. After Catholic emancipation, the number of Catholics continued to grow. After the Reformation in England and the foundation of the Churches of England and Ireland, a series of laws were passed that barred Catholics from buying land, being elected to Parliament, working in the civil service and military, inheriting property, and practicing their religion freely without incurring penalties. For example, Mass had to take place in the middle of nowhere to avoid being caught by the authorities. Also in Ireland, where 80% of the population at the time was Roman Catholic, Catholics were not allowed to vote in any elections for Parliament and could be kicked off their land by their closest Protestant relative. However, by the late 18th century, several laws were passed that gave the Catholics more rights. Laws were passed in 1774, 1778, and 1782 that allowed Catholics to buy land. The Relief Act of 1793 allowed Irish Catholics the right to vote and to work in the civil service. However, after the Act of Union, the staunchly anti-Catholic King George III, the most powerful members of the Irish Protestant community, and members of the British Conservative Party did everything in their power to prevent further Catholic emancipation. In the 1820s, the charismatic lawyer and orator from Kerry, Daniel O'Connell, started to mobilize members of the Catholic middle class and Catholic peasants to campaign for full Catholic emancipation. In 1823, he formed the Catholic Association. Soon they had hundreds of thousands of members. By 1828, there was fear of a civil war breaking out in Ireland if Catholic rights were not recognised. During the 1828 Clare parliamentary by-election, O'Connell, who was a candidate, stated that he would not take his seat in Parliament until the compulsory anti-Catholic oath was taken away. His election win caused then Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington, and Sir Robert Peel to bring in the Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829, which admitted Catholics to all but a small few public offices. With regards to the Catholic Parish Registers, Catholic emancipation only really started to see church parishes keeping records in rural counties. Parish registers have been kept in the more prosperous counties since as early as the 1740s, as stated earlier above. For example, in St. Mary's Parish in Limerick City, church records date from 1745, over 80 years before Catholic emancipation. In the parish of Bangor Erris in rural North County Mayo, records only date from 1860, 31 years after Catholic emancipation.
Thank you for that, Cian. And next on the show, we have Lucas. Lucas, can you tell me how the Catholic parish registers differ from the civil registers that are also available online?
In an 1871 report to Parliament, it was noted that there were three classes of parish in Ireland: the civil parish, the Church of Ireland parish, and the Roman Catholic parish. The civil and Church of Ireland generally, but not always, had the same boundaries, while the Catholic parishes generally didn't share similar boundaries at all. This being said, there are many similarities, as well as differences between the Catholic parish registries and the civil registers. Both have similar roles and uses for research, and differ mainly in the years the information that you can obtain from them occur, and the land that they cover. So the time frame these cover: the Irish Catholic Church records a span of 200 years, most accurately. Records exist from the 1800s all the way back to the 1600s in some cases. These are the most important written records for genealogists, as Cian said. The history research after the census is most important to us. Civil registration, on the other hand, was introduced much later. The English government set up in the 1830s, and it would later be introduced to Ireland by 1845. At this time, upon its first introduction to Ireland, it recorded non-Catholic marriages only. Civil and religious census. Although introduced in 1845, the civil parish records did not account for information of people from all religions until 1864. Within both sets of records, other information can be found, such as townlands, dates, and names of sponsors for baptisms, for example, and so on. Arguably, the most notable way these records vary in the land area they cover. This is due to each county being divided up differently for civil and Catholic church records. For example, of this is in County Wicklow, where there are 21 Roman Catholic parishes compared to 57 civil parishes. From this, we can tell the Roman Catholic parishes tend to be much larger in size and therefore less numerous. There are a few reasons behind the disparities. One of these is due to the Irish Parliament declaring King Henry VIII head of the Irish country, but also the Church of Ireland in 1536. The Church of Ireland then consequently became the Church of the State, retaining all the existing parish structures. The civil registers now operate using these same state parish structures. A result of the 16th century Protestant Reformation, the Roman Catholic Church had to adapt to the structure based on towns and villages with parishes that generally were larger than the old parishes. In addition, Catholic Church parishes were often larger due to them containing a main parish church and a number of other smaller churches or chapels. This main parish church serviced people from a wide variety of areas, moving the need for numerous smaller parishes. Usually only one register will have been kept for the whole parish, but occasionally it might be found that each church or chapel has its own register. In the previously mentioned 1871 report, it was noted that Catholic parish boundaries must be flexible to meet the requirements of the cure of souls, but that for statistical and possibly administrative purposes, the boundaries of civil parishes should be fixed, or at least should rarely change.
And Lucas, can you tell me the process of how the public can access these records today?
In the age of the internet, it's never been easier to research your family tree. Not only do you have access to these records, as they're in the public domain, but searching through those records can be made easier with a host of websites, from free government sites like the National Library to a subscription service like Ancestry.com. Way back when the Normans took England, the new king made a census. The Romans would carry out a government census long before that. But when it comes to your local area, the local clergy kept many of the records you have access to now. They recorded the sacraments, like baptisms, marriages, and deaths. Not all years survives, as said before, because different priests or bishops made and kept the records. Some unlucky parishes have more than others. Keep in mind that a parish is about the size of a town and surrounding land, and some cross between counties, and a diocese is a nearly county-sized area, but they aren't exactly the counties. A little of County Cork is in the Diocese of Kerry, for example. The first step to finding your records would be going to the National Library. You can type National Library parishes into Google and see the records as far back as the 1600s in some cases. On the website, you can type in the name of a parish, or you can click on a map of Ireland and avoid problems with spellings and name changes. The records you find will be hard to read at first, but the National Library site has filters to change the brightness or change the contrast between the writing and the paper. These will help a lot, and if you're somewhat familiar with joint writing, you should have no trouble going through the original records and downloading whatever you wish. For Ancestry.com, you'd have to pay for access to their search system. For those who don't mind, you'd be able to find records not just by location, but by names, first and last, specific years, gender of the person you're looking for, or you could put in two names and find a couple with some relationship. Genealogy.ie has church records for baptisms, marriages, also burials in County Kerry. These are already written out, transcribed, so they're very simple to read. To access records at genealogy.ie, you click on the Church Records tab on the homepage. You'll be brought to a search engine where you can input the information of a person that you wish to find on the church records. This includes the name and surname of the individual, as well as the dates and locations of the events, like baptism, marriage, and burial. Roots.ie. Rootsireland.ie holds the most extensive access to church records that have been transcribed, covering all areas of the country. There are, however, areas that are a little less recorded, such as Donegal, Monaghan, and Wexford. Functionally, much of the same as the other sites, rootsireland.ie will give you all records your search hit on, and you can pick out the church records from the civil records or surveyors' evaluations.
Thank you, Cian and Lucas, for your work on the Catholic Parish Registers. I hope all of our listeners enjoyed, but I think that's where we will wrap it up for today. I would like to thank Lucas and Cian for joining us on the Genealogy Radio Show, and I'd like to thank our listeners for listening to today's show, and I hope that you can join us for next week's show. This show will be repeated on Sunday on Radio Cork Abashkin.